All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to Humanity Needs a Horses interview number 9 on the 9th day of the 6th month. I think there's a 3 something in there. I am so thrilled to be here today with the lovely Kim McElroy from Washington State. It's such a beautiful place and such a beautiful property. Welcome everybody. If you have any questions along the way, certainly put them in the chat, and if we have time, we'll get to them. I know we're gonna have a great discussion today, but if we do have time, we will certainly pull a few of those out and ask them to Kim. So let's just get this started. And Kim, introduce
Yay.
yourself, your horses. Hello.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm Kim McElroy. I'm an equine artist, and my business is Spirit of Horse Gallery. And this is my SkyeLandeSea farm, and my horse Dharma in the background there. She's the one who created it. I just manifested it for her. So when I met her as a racehorse over 20 years ago, I had no idea that I would be leading a new life and everything. I knew I was a horse lover, and I was becoming a painter at that time, professional artist, but I didn't know that she would lead me to a new life with other horses and other animals and beautiful experiences. So
Absolutely. Tell us about
yeah.
your property. It's such a beautiful property. Where are you
It is
located?
amazing. We're in Kingston, Washington, which is about an hour north of Seattle across the Puget Sound. So we're right just uphill from the Puget Sound, about a mile down the road, and a little town called Kingston, and the Kitsap Peninsula. So it's a little more rural than the city, and but even so, it's rare to find a farm here. I think there's just a handful of properties that are over 3 acres. So this is an 8-acre plot, and we just were so blessed to find it. The house was built in 1918. I'll turn around so you can see a little bit of that. And the little 800 square foot cottage. And we found out over the years about all the previous, just the really 2 families that lived here before us, and the horses that lived here too, because the property owners who bought it in the 50s had, let's see, I think they were Tennessee Walkers. So actually we have their photo albums, which is amazing because they had no children. And the lady that sold us the property after he passed gave us his photo albums with all their horses. So we feel like the ancestors of our horse friends are still here. So yeah, so we've built from scratch everything you see here, and you'll see it has a unique feel. We have interesting fences because we built them out of pallets, because the first attempt we made at real fencing, we didn't want to use pressure treated boards, so we made the mistake of building all this beautiful fencing, and then 2 years later it all the posts rotted. So in the meantime, we were acquiring a herd of horses and other animals, llamas, goats, and pot-bellied pigs that we started rescuing. It didn't start out like with an intentional, okay, we're going to open a sanctuary rescue place. It just, once you have land and people find out that you have a heart, then so soon, vets or other people were saying, gosh, can you take this dog? Their owner's going to put him down, or can you take this pot-bellied pig? Or, so within, oh gosh, about 3 years, we had, about 4 years, we had 21 animals. So it was amazing. And we kept having to juggle behaviors, health issues. At first everybody lived together happily, the llamas and the goats, and except for the pigs, they had their own, they were individual in the backyard, but the dogs and the pigs got along. But it soon became apparent that there were some challenges, like as you'll see, we'll discuss a little bit about my horses with laminitis. So all this wonderful green grass that we thought was paradise for animals turned out to be a bit of a challenge, and to say the least. So we started having to segregate certain horses away from grass, and so we started using pallets. And I was going to mention how unique that's been, because not only, at least around here, a lot of times they were free at the time. They're becoming more popular now, but they've turned into kind of a habitat. Like the birds and the squirrels and the critters love to hide in them and nest in them and hop through them and in and out. So it's like a hedgerow more than a fence. And we had to learn over the time, you know, how to design it so they wouldn't fall over. We started by tying them together, and that wasn't working. And then they'd want to eat the grass over the fence, so they knocked the fence over. So we didn't want to have to use posts, so eventually Rod built what he calls a China wall. So you see it stacked, and that way they can't reach over. Yeah, but it requires a lot of pallets, so it's a bit of a unique design. So anyway.
And where do you get those from? Where do you?
Feed stores, pet stores, hardware stores, and yeah.
Interesting.
And
yeah. So who have you got on the property there?
We've got Dharma, as I mentioned, and then we've had 7 horses over the years, and 4 of them have passed. And so we now have Mystico. Let's see, I'll turn you around so I can see where we're going and go into the barn.
There we go.
This is a little shed that was built here in 1918, and there's a little cottage that we lived in for 16 years. And now we have our big house up the hill that we just built.
Nice.
And so this is our barn, and open. Nobody's shut in. Everybody gets to choose where they want to be.
Nice.
And
did you build the barn?
Rod did, my husband.
Yep.
Yeah. He'd never built anything but a birdhouse. And here's Mystico. Hi. There's my boy. He's Pasofino. He's a little bit claustrophobic, so he might say, I don't know about this, but hello. And he's very sweet, though. He's, as you know, gray horses that start out black. So when I got him at 4 years old, he was completely steel gray. Nice. And over the years, he's turned beautifully white and freckled.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And then this is little Laddie. He's our little mini. He was actually my second horse. I wasn't looking for a horse, as most of us don't really go out looking for horses. But
no.
I found him at a miniature horse farm, and clearly from the beginning he was a stallion, and alone, as stallions are. And I like to say that, you know, all of our horses are rescued, even if they were well treated by their previous owners, because you know, most people don't really account for the social and the emotional lives of horses. So he was alone in his paddock and wasn't being used for breeding. So when I met him, he was quite depressed, and I thought, oh, he's just a little horse. Maybe it shouldn't be too hard, right? Well, yeah, we learned a lot about that.
I bet.
He's been, excuse me, my earphone fell out. Sorry, I'm making probably all sorts of noise.
That's all right. No.
Actually, he inspired such a love for the miniature horse, and very quickly we adopted another miniature mare and another gelding, and so he had his own herd, sort of, as well as our 4 big horses. And we built his paddock so that the big horses can't get in, and so he can be in and out as he chooses, and without feeling intimidated by, you know, someone taking up his space. And they're all in their 20s now, so he's had a lot of choice about. He misses his herd, I'm sure. We lost the 2 minis over the last few years, and so they we have come really close to getting him another miniature friend, but we really don't want to take any more animals on. So he's good, happy.
Excellent. I love that idea that he has a choice to go in and out, but the horses can't get in, so he does have the space.
He does, and he also has his own little fence, so he can look over the alleyway, you know, and see what I'm doing in the barn. And because that's the other thing is a lot of people don't consider with miniatures is they can't, you know, if there's a big tall wall or fence, they can't see out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I've seen small doors made for them within the big door.
Oh yeah.
and sort of like a dog door where they could go in and out. But yeah, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Okay.
And I think we were going to talk a little bit when we do about upper trail that we built for Mystico. So we
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Well, let's just go on to that. I just wanted to stop for a second and let everybody know here that if you want to ask any questions, normally we don't, but I thought today if anybody wants to ask any questions, if we have time at the end, or if I see one come through, we can stop and ask it then. But if you'd like to, that's certainly something we can do this time. So yeah, let's go on to our sort of our next discussion point. Was equine leadership always started with the view that when horses are as close to nature as possible, they provide us with a sort of a model of living that is, you know, peaceful and positive that we can learn from. But in the world we live in, to make a horse or to allow horses to be as close to nature as possible isn't always that easy. So first of all, how do you create that? And obviously you're showing us right here how you create it. It's beautiful. And then
it was a
what are the
challenge.
challenges? Yeah, what are some of the challenges you face?
Well, like I said, when we first got here, we thought, oh, great, you know, everybody can just graze and we'll feed them and everybody will be happy and healthy. And we really wished for that. But I'd never managed outdoor animals before, and I didn't know anything about farming. And I think even if we had, we still would have had the same challenges, because this environment and this grass is here year round, and it's very rich, and it's not a field, it's not even really a pasture, it's more like a golf course. So the horses that were insulin resistant and had those tendencies metabolically or genetically began gaining weight, and we didn't recognize it, because when you don't really you don't know about that, you go in feet first and find out. And so over the years we pretty much had everybody living together, which is my goal. It was always that horses should live together and have a herd, and they taught each other in amazing ways, which are longer stories. But up until about a year ago, we were really doing well with that model, and I would lock Mystico and Laddie in when Dharma could go out to graze. But she has to be, she's kind of agoraphobic, so if I can't shut a gate and keep her out of her paddock or stall, because if she gets anxious, she wants to run back in. So we had to lock them in and let her out and juggle like that. But then Mystico's laminitis began to be more of an issue, and he needed more movement, but I couldn't move him anywhere because he had to have dirt paddock. And if I take him out on the grass, he's frustrated by not being able to put his nose down and eat, which is what he wants to do. So we learned about this technique called pasture paradise, which many people do with big properties, but you can sometimes do with a smaller property. And in our case, we built, I'll turn it around again. We built, we call it a paradise trail. So it's a dirt trail around the grass mound, because we wouldn't be able to manage keeping all that grass out of the habitat. And so that way he walks around the perimeter and eats his hay on the mats, and so does Laddie. And so they keep each other moving, which is nice, without me having to move them all the time.
Oh, on the mats, okay. Yeah.
And then they kind of go around and around, because they forget, well, did I leave some hay around the corner here? Is there maybe some hay around the corner there? And they walk way more than they would have. I really had never imagined how well this would work. And it's been terrific, because in a big wide open paddock, which is what we had here, they walk 10 feet and eat, and then walk 10 feet and eat. But they don't really move around as much as when there's the principle is that the corridor of like 8 to 10 feet actually creates movement, because it's just a little bit of a push to kind of like, they're not totally comfortable in that space, so they keep moving a little bit more.
Yeah. And does that go, where does that go? It goes all the way
around?
Goes
all the way around like a square. When we get up to the house, I can show you an aerial view.
Okay.
It goes to this wooden fence in front of me, turns the corner, and then it goes to the trees up there, turns the corner, and goes around. So
it's a whole circuit. Yeah.
It's about, just a small paddock, but at least it keeps them moving. And and the electric fence keeps them away from the grass.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And where do you find where do you find they, say when it's raining, where do you find, like I see there's a tree line up there. Do they use the natural
Yeah, I wish
shelters?
they did. We made it so that they could, but we find that domestic horses really just really like to be closer to home. Um, and that's the other challenge we found with having them live together is even when we have the run-in stalls they were all open to each other. The dominant horse, in this case Dharma, would sort of claim that space even if she wasn't in the second stall. So Mystico was usually out in the rain. And
Mm,
we used to think it was by choice until we separated them, which we didn't want to do, but it has worked out better. And they've lived together long enough that they don't feel isolated.
for sure.
And
Yeah, yeah.
so he does seek shelter, and Laddie in particular. Laddie loves his stall. I have a hard time getting him out of there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's kind of a homebody, and he likes to,
Yeah.
yeah, he doesn't
Excellent.
have much. I was thinking that the other day, is a miniature horse, so he has kind of a small stomach. So where I can use food as a draw to get Mystico to move and come out and graze, Laddie's full within half an hour. So he's kind of like, well, I'm bored.
I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm full. I don't need any more.
Yeah,
Nice, nice.
yeah.
And those are all rubber mats?
All rubber mats,
Nice.
and we used to have a roofed area out here, but we didn't build it well enough to withstand the weight of the snow. So it's just kind of an artistic view now.
Of course.
And then we have
Um,
that little shelter.
oh, look at that. Excellent. And
Yeah,
then, so, yeah, let's talk about winters then. What's your winter like there?
not too bad. We do have some snow, so it's you have to be prepared for it, which we never are. We're
Nice.
excuse me here. Um, when it's actually kind of harder because people that are used to snow are prepared for it, and they get they have the heated water buckets and whatever they need.
Mm,
And some people prefer it. They're like, well, I don't have to pick up manure. But with us, it's usually a storm, and it's sometimes the power goes out. It's a really big deal when it snows here, and it's wet, heavy snow, so it's not easy to navigate in. And even if you have the heated bucket set up, it's a problem. So,
yeah.
and then with Mystico, it's a challenge because I learned as we went along that his laminitis and his compromised feet can be much more a crisis if they get cold because of the lack of circulation, and he can founder just from having
Okay.
frozen feet. So
Okay.
that's been a challenge as the years have gone by. But we only have that
Interesting.
maybe for 3-4 days in the wintertime, and the rest of the time it's just rainy and windy
Yeah.
and winter storms.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Oh, it's absolutely beautiful, Kim. I could see how you
Yeah,
call that home. It's absolutely gorgeous. So let's, now we've seen outside. Can we go see
yeah,
inside?
we absolutely can.
Awesome. Okay.
I'll show you
Yeah,
the
we're
view as
gonna
I walk up the hill.
journey with Kim up to her studio and her house.
When Linda first saw this view, she's like, "Oh, the horses can walk up right to the house," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, they can. Dharma can, but Mystico
That's
can't."
about it.
Um,
And
but she does sometimes.
nice. And tell us about your other herd members there that you I often see in pictures.
The other
Your,
herd members. Oh, the deer.
yes.
So I wish we had one here for you. We used to laugh and say, "Cue the deer," because they show up when
Cute
people come to
deer.
visit. We have hey, Dharma girl. This is Dharma. Yeah.
Oh, she's lovely. And how long have you had her?
Um, uh, let's see, 23 years. So
Wow.
yeah, amazing. Our deer family started about 6 years ago with feeding a young doe and a little buck that they would come for apples at our tree. And we just have a tiny apple tree, so it's not like tons of apples. And when the apples ran out, we started throwing them apples. And pretty soon they were coming for apples. And as the doe got older, she had fawns, and she started bringing her fawns. So now we're at like the 4th generation of that family.
Wow.
And And what's amazing is that even another doe that we have that didn't come from the beginning but got the picture and started eating the apples, she started bringing her fawns, even though they were, let's see, they were about 3 months old when they came. They were instantly tame, even though they hadn't been coming.
Really?
So they, they know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the entrance to my studio.
Oh, lovely.
And we built this house about 5 years ago. A big dream of ours, one of those like take a leap of faith kind of dreams. Didn't have the money to do it, but somehow manifested it, and here it is.
Thank you for that reminder.
Yes. Yes.
And we're done. That's all we needed. Just kidding. And the driftwood, is the driftwood from around there? I would assume you have lots of driftwood.
We do. And these chairs are actually sculpted from Thailand. And we have a friend who sells amazing imports from Thailand. And she has, over the years, many carvers that she works with. And so you can see our other animal family is in sculptures.
Oh my goodness. Those are amazing.
Yeah, aren't they?
Wow.
And then at the front of the house, we have two like 6 feet tall deer sculptures that are also each like one tree each. They're just incredible.
Beautiful. All right. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, the Hobbit door, I saw that the other day.
The Hobbit door, yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'm going to have to navigate the cat here, so make sure I don't let him out. Come on. I know. Go on. Go on. That's Ricky. And here we are in my studio.
Brilliant.
I know. So I worked for all these years in the cottage in an 800 square foot house, and so my studio was like 7 by 9 feet. And so one of my dreams was to have a nice big roomy studio that I could spread out in and have all the room I needed.
Beautiful.
There it is.
Oh my goodness. And things that you've been gifted and found over the years and made, and yes. Oop, I think we're frozen there. Just wait for that to get back. Oh, there you are. Kim,
Hi.
there's a sculpture on your in your window there.
Yes, this one.
Yeah. What's the story with that?
It's a really so the same friend that I mentioned, which anything ethnic that you see is probably from Jerry's Creature Comfort shop in Hansville. This is a if you see the silhouette, you can't really see the detail, but it's a horse with wings, and is incredible. It was a gift from my friend Connie Funk, and it's these are on the prows of ox carts, and they're carved to protect the passenger, to sort of as like a guide or a totem for the ox cart driver to protect his passengers. And so they get it very elaborate with their designs. Sometimes they're people or animals, and you can't see the detail, but it's a horse.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And so she likened it to Dharma because Dharma's my soulmate.
Ah, beautiful.
Ricky says, "No, I'm your soulmate."
No, it's mine. That's right. Choose one.
Yeah, exactly. Here's another fun piece that I love. I've always loved his work. His name is Jim Artis. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful work. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
This is one of my pieces called Stillness. Hard to see with the reflections, but this is a mare with. She came and rescued me from a group of over-anxious yearlings that were trying to trample me, and she came and was the babysitter at this big ranch, and she just said, "Are you all right?" And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And she came under the trees with me, so there were all these beautiful shadows on her face.
That's what that is. Okay. Yes, I've seen that picture. Yeah.
Framed her with a branch in there so that you can see the feeling.
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Beautiful. So where did this all start for you? Where did this? What's your?
Yeah, I started as artist in 1987. Professionally, I started creating my work specifically of horses, even though I'd always loved horses, and they, grew up, as many of us do, wanting to be a horse and crawling around on my hands and knees. And I didn't have access to horses, so I think my art was really my way of connecting with them. And when I knew I was going to be an artist from the very beginning, that was just never a question. And fortunately, my parents were very supportive of that, especially my mom. And so when we moved to Washington, California, then Griffin's, my other cat's hungry. He's gonna thump on the board here. So I began, once I attended art school, I was, that summer, we were supposed to do some projects. And I was at a horse farm with some friends of ours. And I had always, drawn horses all my life. But looking back, I realized that I had never seen horses at liberty. I'd only seen horses in, being ridden or being trained or handled. And she had Arabian horses, and they were in their stalls one day, and she said, "Would you like me to let them out at liberty?" I was trying to draw them, and I was like, they're kind of just napping, there's not much, I'm just drawing anatomy kind of thing. And I said, "Oh yeah." And so she let them out, and it was completely just an epiphany for me at the moment of seeing them at liberty and, running with their spirit and their tail up in the air and snorting, blowing. And I was trying to draw them. I had been learning what's called gesture drawing, and drawing on the right side of the brain techniques by Betty Edwards. And gesture drawing is drawing a model within, like a minute or 30 seconds, trying to capture their essence in line. And when I was getting frustrated trying to draw these horses because they were moving. And so I started remembering that technique. And as I started sketching what I imagined they might look like 30 seconds ago, because they're already,
already gone
by me, I did these just a few pages really of sketches, but they were just different than anything I'd done. They're actually here on the wall. I'll show them to you. And the woman who owned them was an artist herself, and she said, "Oh, these are fantastic. You really need to do something with these." So this is one of the sketchbooks. And with the article that I wrote for you about cave paintings, right from the beginning, it felt like, like these are like cave paintings.
Good point.
And, so that was the essence of where things began. And in my training in school, then I realized, I don't just want to be an illustrator, for hire, working for hire for someone. I've got a unique voice. So it's like the horses gave me that unique voice, and allowed me to create a whole new style that I didn't know I had. And then when in school, I started trying to find a medium that had that spontaneity that I had felt. And this is one of my first pastels. And that was when I discovered pastel. My instructor had a box sitting on the counter, and I said, try those. So that's all I use now, and they're chalk. They're a dry medium. I'll show you, pull out a drawer here and show you what they look like. So this is one of my amazing drawers of pastels.
I have to, Kim, that warms my heart. My uncle was an artist, and he had a tackle box, a green tackle box full of pastels.
Wow.
And we would go and see him, and we would get to play with these pastels in the green. My daughter still has it. So when I saw a picture of that drawer opened up on your website, it's like, it just.
There's something about them, I swear.
I don't know. I went and got myself some now, because it's just like, there's something about them, the texture. Yeah. So is that all you work in now?
That's all I work in. I've been doing them for 30 years now, and they achieve everything I love, and they have this I remember reading an article by an artist that talked about how he loved them. He said that as opposed to painting, that he felt like pastels were so tactile because they're just at the end of your fingertips. There's no brush in between you and the paper. You use your hand. I use my hands to blend the chalks together in colors and forms and softness and line, and it's just very, very amazing medium.
So you're almost feeling it, yeah.
I was going to say I could find a piece of paper and do a little. Ricky,
would you?
What do you do?
Oh, I think we'd be honored.
I didn't think about that.
Comes from the
Lots
heart.
of chalks here. Yeah.
Comes from the heart. Wow. So how do you think, while you're doing that, how do you feel, we often talk about the voice and the wisdom of the horse and how we all can assist the horses in bringing out their voice.
Yeah.
How does that, how does that work in the artist world? Like how, and what you do, how do you feel that? Can you speak to that a bit as to?
Yeah. Well, as I painted horses and initially just came out with, what I wanted to paint, what I was feeling was a beautiful design or the colors or the textures. And then as I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just about color on paper, and that it was what I had done in those line drawings, I called them at the time, was that I had felt something happen. And so, you see it can go line, it can go. It's hard to do this and hold the phone, so at least you get the idea. But you see it's a messy medium.
Oh yeah, it is.
So you have to, there's a little bit of learning involved, but it's actually very intuitive. I find it very intuitive, partly because you don't have to mix colors in advance. They're just like a big box of crayons.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So anyway, I wash my hands here. I discovered that I was painting feelings, not just images or animals or nature, and that those original drawings that I've now called spirit sketches were really just like sumi painting. They were energy in form on paper, and that people reacted to them with that feeling. And if I hadn't had the direct dialogue with people who saw my art, because I immediately I'm very outgoing, as you see, so it was easy for me to be self-promoting my work and going to events and meeting people, and so people started reacting emotionally to my paintings and feeling what I intended in them, even if I didn't know I was conveying that. And so the art began to connect me with other people who felt the same way, and or awaken something in them, even if they didn't really have a connection with horses, or if they didn't know that, it would just like trigger this emotional reaction in them, and they'd be like, oh, just when I was little, I loved horses. Why did I forget that? So yeah, I think the art is an unspoken language that people can understand, and the more I discovered that's what was happening, the more I started fine-tuning my ability to channel that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of reactions do you get? Like the horses, if we see that connection happen, and it's not in front of an actual horse, but we have this connection. What is it there? What is that the horses do? How does that? Yeah. Hard to explain. I
think even that it is. But I've watched it time and again, and I've done a lot of thinking about it. I think it's that and most of the time I was at a busy like trade show or something when this would happen. So it wasn't even like someone coming into my studio or my farm and having that kind of experience where they're already primed. but at a big event center or horse show where there's loudspeakers going off, and I think that there's just something about the art that when it is intended to tap into that place, when it is created with the horse in mind as being a sentient being, and that my feeling about that the art is a portal for them to tap into that consciousness. When they were in front of the painting, they would become more still, and it kind of provided a buffer to the world and allowed them to hone their senses down to this visual, kinesthetic, emotional experience, to where they got in touch with themselves, and unconscious and subconscious thoughts would bubble up. So whatever they needed to feel from it, it was, I began realizing at one of the first workshops I went to with Linda Kohanoff that Sandra Wallen from Chiron's Way was hosting, and it was totally synchronistic that I ended up being able to go, because 5 people canceled before I was able to go. But I started thinking about what many of us call the body scan, when you're standing in front of a horse and reading what am I feeling when I'm not engaging with the horse, and what am I feeling when I'm with the horse. And I began realizing that's what happened with my art, that people would stand in front of the art and change the way they felt a minute ago. And it would just rise up in them, and then we'd talk about, what is that, And one of the most I would say surprising or profound ones that happened was, I have a painting called Bella's Song that's a horse with a butterfly in the background, and that was one of the first, I would say, when things started to shift for me, when I realized that the synchronicities that happened in what came about in the composition was telling a bigger story than even I could imagine. And that painting was a turning point, because I had this impression of a butterfly. It showed up in a CD I was playing that day, and in another way, and I was struggling with what to do with the painting, and suddenly I just realized it had to have a butterfly in it, and it was going to be a really big butterfly, like bigger than the horse. And I wasn't sure, it was a commissioned portrait, and but the client was very open to my intuition, and she actually loved being surprised, so I was like, okay. So and well, then I find out that the horse's name is Cabo's Butterfly, was her registered name. So that kind of thing started to happen. So within my own sphere of synchronicity, that was amazing. And then when I took it to an event and showcased it, one woman in particular, I remember, came up, and she was just enthralled with it, and she started to cry, and I said, oh, and at first I had been telling her the story that the mare had passed away, and I thought she was reacting to the story of the horse. And then when she could gather her thoughts, she said, no, actually the reason I'm touched by this is my brother passed away a year ago, and he had this thing for butterflies, and he was such a macho, great guy, and you just wouldn't imagine that such a masculine guy would not be in touch with butterflies, but it was a magical thing. And so it just made me realize that there's so many layers to our inner life, and there's something about horses that taps into that. They put us in touch with it.
For sure. And I like how you, I'm connecting with what you said, is that when we look at a painting, we're still and we're quiet.
Yeah.
And you said something in
even
your article
beyond our expectations, like it happens anyway.
Exactly. But I remember in your article, and it's a piece I put up last night, that if we allow our state of mind to become quiet in the presence of horses, we have access. We have that access to so much more.
There's and I think art that has that in mind. I mean, I'm not just touting my art. It's any art, any experience in nature, any time that we listen to a tape on meditation, or any kind of stillness that we can create in ourselves, um, gives us time to ask those questions or feel those feelings that otherwise we're just pulled by the conscious mind into the outer external world.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk just for a minute. I'm just going to jump out of that space for a minute, and then we'll come back to it. But I just want we talked about the times we're in now, and our life that we're all, you know, in now, with the quarantine orders and things like that, and slowly coming out of them. And you and I were talking the other day a bit about how you have had more people out visiting the horses, and or like even walking down the road and stopping.
Yeah.
How does
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Well, it was lovely because I've always, and by the way, I would just want to mention, my phone looks like it's getting low on battery. So if I lose you, I'm gonna go up to my computer and call from there.
Okay, that's fine.
Um, uh, yeah. So after living here for 20 years now, we kept hoping and wishing that more people sort of would enjoy visiting the horses, especially people with kids or whatever. And even so, the neighborhood families didn't really drop by, and that's okay. I mean, we're busy with life, but we just kind of were like, how can people drive by this amazing place and not see it? You know, it's almost like they would just, you know, that, just like you said, the conscious mind, they were driving up the road and they didn't go, oh, you know. And
Mm,
so when
yeah.
people started walking, which is rare too, um, and they were families together. I think that instead of just being the mom out for a jog,
Yeah.
you know, it was the mom or the parents with both kids, and
Yep.
then the kids probably is what drew them, you know, in, because the kids had time too to not be just walking the dog, but they were just walking for pleasure, and then they could see over the fence, um, and they could see that there was a horse there. And what was interesting was it was kind of all happening at the right time,
Mm,
where my horse has also been, at times she can be, Dharma can be sensitive and defensive, or worried about people on the road, or depending on, you know, their energy, really,
yep.
if they're
Yep.
too motivated or too aggressive, she's not interested in them. But when they started slowing down, they started looking over the fence, she started approaching them and being
Wow.
willing to come closer. And especially kids, because she's more prone to respond to children. But and it wasn't just about treats, or, you know, do you have something for me? It was like, oh, well, if you're going to look at me, then I'll look back at you, you know. And it
Ah.
was quite amazing. And now it's kind of stopped again. People are back in their busy lives, and I really was touched by it. And one of the families that dropped by, uh, her kids were so enthralled, and I was telling them over the fence, because they came down with bikes and their bike helmets, and Darn was kind of like,
What?
that's kind of scary. So I explained to them, well, you know, you look like an alien from another planet. So if you take your bike helmet off and you kind of just stand still for a minute, she'll probably come over. And sure enough, she did. And so they got to kind of have a perception of, how does she see me? And
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, and so they did like a treasure hunt, or Easter egg hunt, I think it was. And one of the treasures was, go where the big brown beast is, or something like that. And so the kids were finding their treasure, their egg,
Oh, that's
right by
great.
the fence. And it was ironic, because we also would have invited them in, and we told them, please come back when, you know, when we're not quarantined, and we can have you actually come into the
Yeah.
stall. But that's a catch-22, actually. I think then it gets into visiting and conversation and feeding treats or whatever to engage with the horses. But that kind of magical, um, being on the other side of the fence and seeing this world and Dharma in it, you know, was really a draw. And I just can't help but wonder, you know, if those kids will grow up and go, wow, I had this really magical experience with a horse, you know?
Remember that day. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
some really interesting how that being forced to slow down, create and doing those things creates sort of a different perspective.
Yeah,
And
very much so.
yeah.
That stillness that we were talking about, you know,
Yeah.
like how to tap into that stillness in as many ways as we can.
Sure. And how do we
Mhm.
keep that now? How do we learn from that, and how
Right.
do we keep that? And interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So how do you create go into back into your artwork for a bit? How do you I go on intuition here, so I'll go on like
Mhm.
question that's in my head. But we talk about creating space. So generally, often we'll talk with somebody who's a facilitator. We'll talk like how do they create space for horse and human. But how do you, in your artwork, say if somebody's coming to a commission piece with a horse, either a horse alive or passed away, how do you create that space for yourself, and what's the process you go through with
Yeah,
yourself, with
good
the owner?
question. Well, with in the engagement of somebody talking about a portrait, for instance, it's either, you know, virtual in the sense of, you know, most of my clients are not local, so we're having a phone conversation and emails about what they're interested in, and most of my clients, I think, from some time ago, I began talking about my intuition and how I'm really not just painting a beautiful horse, you know, for you to look at. That my intention is really to paint the spirit of the horse as something that you can connect with emotionally. And so most of my clients, I would say most, about half of the clients have lost their horses, and
Mm,
that's when they have um, the desire to tap into how to stay connected. And
yeah,
so we have conversations about the horse, and most of the people that I work with are, you know, are aware of the deep sentience and connection with horses.
yeah.
So it's very easy to have those conversations. I I used to have more clients that were maybe, you know, into showing or that kind of world, and that's fine too. It's interesting to give them an opportunity to see an unexpected side of their horse than they even realized
Yeah.
they were looking for.
Hmm.
But we often will talk about the horses, and they'll show me whatever pictures they have, and because I do work from photographs in most cases, though sometimes my work is more stylized, and in that case, it's more of like the spirit sketch style.
Hmm.
And so it's evolved. My more recent work is more collaborative. Like I will often, with someone who wants to be engaged in the process,
Hmm.
we talk about, you know, like the client I'm working with right now, she lost her mare, who was one of her therapy horses, and I had an experience in meditation with her that was this incredibly expansive
Hmm.
space, and so I was very leaning more towards like a space cosmic theme, and I did a mock-up of it on my computer of what my concepts were, and then she said, I really love that, but I also feel like she's also looking back at who she was in life. So I'm wondering if we could, you know, include an element of my farm. And she sent me, or previously she had asked me if I could paint her barn
Hmm.
and you know, like aspects of the domestic life. And I was like, well, I can, but let's see where this goes. And so she ended up sending me a picture of this beautiful, expansive sunset sky over her farm. And I said, oh, okay, maybe this is combined. So then I came up with a composition that was the horse as this sort of transparent spirit in the clouds over her farm with the Milky Way galaxy at the top of the composition going off into the cosmos. So
Yeah.
it, you know, in that case it evolved, and so in the process of actually tuning in to do the work, I do the composition, and then I compose it on the paper. And then
Yeah.
um, the interesting thing about pastel that's informed the process for me is that Pastel typically work back to front, and because the more how shall I say this, the more detailed aspects, like the horse's realism of the coat of the horse, and the shine and the eyes and all those things, you really want them to be last, to be most tangible and crisp in the way the medium goes down, because it's kind of a dusty medium. So and doing the background first allows allows me to see what environment they're in. Like, I do the environment first, and then I do the being, and I do the eyes last, which is, some artists do the eyes first depending on the medium, but for me, I'd rather kind of bring that all together in the most sort of pinnacle moment. And emotionally, it's more of a process of, like you said, that stillness, you know, setting aside the time in my day and not getting myself in a bind, which I often do. And I often will meditate before working, so that I can just get into that space of quiet. And I play music all the time. Music is a big part of my work, and the synchronicity of music that plays while I'm working is fun too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have to say, I love your YouTube video, and you're drawing the essence of the horse.
Thank you.
That is, can you tell us a bit about it? That is phenomenal. And there you have a meditation in that, or a bit of a, that bit of a visualization, which I have never, ever seen anything like it.
Oh my gosh.
The feeling of it. I've never been able to become a horse like that. So
oh my gosh, that's great.
I will certainly post that with this if folks here haven't seen it, but it is phenomenal. I went out and bought pastels and stuff to work with it, and I've been working on phenomenal. Like how did that come about? Like, how did you?
Thank you so much. It's well, you know, my artistic creative world is also a big part of my desire is to teach, and I do love teaching. And I kept wanting, you know, so many artists I would meet, you know, frustrated artists or people who didn't think they could draw. And I taught workshops over the years with Linda Kohanov and Sandra Wallen, and trying to give people free rein to tap into that part of themselves, because it isn't only a learned skill. It really is inherent, which is why I love coming back to the cave paintings, because you know, it's just a matter of getting the media on the paper, whatever form, or sculpting, or whatever form you want to take it in. But it evolved in my attempt to try to speak to all skill levels of whether they're kids or adults who've never drawn before and don't believe they can. And because music is such a part of my life, I relate the story that I, you know, once, probably the biggest moment when I realized about how effective music could be. I was traveling in San Francisco and visiting a store with my mother on some travels to Europe. And I found this store, and the beautiful fairies and toys and really cool stuff. And she sold me a CD. She said, I think it was playing in the store, and I was really touched by the music. And I bought the CD. Back then it was cassette tape probably, and listened in the hotel, not in, you know, a perfect environment for being creative, but the music just transported me. And I started painting these beautiful watercolors that I was working on of horses. And I think I was 16 at the time, you know, it was just the beginning of everything. And I was so excited about what had emerged. It was different and better and more beautiful than what I'd done before. And so the next day I went back to the store, and I brought my painting and said, thank you so much for telling me about that music. It just totally took me to another place, and look what I painted, and I'm so excited. And she said, these are amazing. Oh my gosh, wow. Well, gosh, I would really love to have your paintings in my store. And I was just just thrilled. You know, I was just beginning, 16 years old, and this woman wants to sell my art. You know, it was just huge. So all that enthusiasm and all that joy came from the music
Yeah.
expressed in the art. And so I wanted other people to be able to tap into that
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so I do a, you know, illustration of putting music on, and then music leads to emotion. So then I began thinking, well, you know, how to teach this would be um, letting people like draw something to each different pieces of music, and then think about some, or pick music and think about something that's an emotion, like
Yeah.
joy or sorrow or whatever the feeling is.
Mm-hmm.
And just as you begin to express all that, and then starting to look at the horse with those things in mind, like, you know, what does it make me feel like when I see a horse standing in the field by itself? Does it make me feel joy? Does it make me feel like it's alone? Does it, you know, it's a part of me that horse is reflecting. And then the difficult part is to try to teach someone. You can't teach how to draw horses because everybody has their own take. And as I talk about in the film, you know, it's not about anatomy, it's not about muscles and bone structure and how a horse moves. You know, people can learn that,
Yeah.
and even I have trouble learning that. But really it's about how do we express, regardless of whether it looks like a horse even, how do we express our feelings for horses or life or our inner self, to get it out of us onto paper. It's more about that. And so the drawing of horses just happens to be my way of tapping into that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the meditation, how to, you know, to become a horse. And that's what happened to me when I drew those first sketches, is
Yeah.
when those horses were running around, I had to imagine, how does that feel for that horse to be so playful with their tail up in the air? How do I embody that in my body? How
Mm.
do I channel that into a line and put it on paper?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's like as you're saying that, I feel like it's like you're drawing the essence. You're drawing what somebody feels like when they're standing in front of a horse, like or when they're doing an exercise with a horse or facilitating or whatever. But you're putting that to an image,
Yeah.
and that feeling comes out in that image.
Yeah. And it's a language whether we know it or not. You know, it just,
Yeah.
like, just as horses are speaking to us in a language that's kinesthetic and visual and emotional, that art is a language too. It's just because the being that's standing in front of you, it happens to be pastel instead of flesh and blood,
Mhm.
you know, is we're all connected, and there's no difference to me um, between a quote unquote two-dimensional image and life. It's all life.
It's all life. Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. So we always ask for a story. We always ask
Yeah,
for some story that has that people could resonate with, and something that somebody's really had a reaction to. And so you have a story set up for us here.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Let's
wanted to
go with
show you
that.
the
Yeah.
painting that I just had finished, that you got maybe a little glimpse of when I walked through here. Hang on. Okay, there we go. This is a new portrait commission I just finished, and her name is Claire, and she's a Kiger Mustang mare, and her owner Holly commissioned me to paint her, and she is an angel now. She passed away in November, and what was wonderful was Holly intentionally didn't tell me a whole lot about her other than her breed and, you know, her love for her, and she didn't really go into detail about her background. So she wanted me to be free to interpret whatever I could sense from her. And it was actually interesting because sometimes I have very vivid visualizations. Sometimes I have had very abstract ones. And in this case, I actually couldn't receive anything when I went into meditation with her. I couldn't actually feel like I was connecting with her, and I was quite. I had that had been happening to me recently from, I think, some other life challenges and things I'm shifting. So I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even I can't even tell quite where to go with this. And so I wrote Holly and I said, I actually touched base with my friend who's an animal communicator, clairvoyant, named Diane Barrett.
Mm-hmm.
And I texted Diane and I said, I'm having trouble just touching base with this horse. And her name is Claire and like that. And she said, oh, I think she has a message for you and her owner. And that's different than maybe what questions you're asking. So I went, oh, okay. So I wrote Holly and Holly said, oh, I would love to talk with her. I really always wanted to learn more about animal communication. So we connected, and Diane said that Claire was saying that that it was sort of the bigger picture question you're asking. Like there was more to the conversation than what I was asking. And it wasn't just about how to portray her. And she mentioned that she had wings. And so in that sense, you could say, well, I just took that and ran with it. But the cool part was that it really opened up Holly's heart, because she was grieving for the loss of her mare, and she'd had a 5-year battle with laminitis, and so was really heartbroken at her passing, and wanted to feel like she'd made the right choices and everything. So it was all very beautiful about Claire letting her off the hook about her loss and the timing of her death and such, which is also very healing. And so then when I did tune in with Claire, then I was able to have the conversation. And what she showed me was 2 glimpses of, first she showed me this feeling of these wings in front of her face, like peeking through the feathers. And the second impression was when I was in meditation and I was asking her about how do I know what questions to ask? And I saw a feather again, but this was the single feather, and it was a blue feather. Like it was like, choose this feather. And so I like reached in my mind's eye and touched the feather, and I started thinking about the color and the blue. And it was just right when the pandemic first hit, and I was thinking, blue reminds me of air and how people are afraid to breathe right now because they're just panicking. And so I went into this whole healing experience of trying to send light and love out to the planet and to the humans who were afraid to breathe. And I realized that what she was showing me was that asking the questions was as simple as picking a color, and in this case a feather. And so this whole journey of painting this painting has allowed me to tap in more to my intuition. And in the process, there was a class going on about intuition, and I told Holly about it, and she was excited. So she and I joined each other in the class. Awesome. And so she's been learning all about intuition and finding ways to honor herself and her horse that she has now. And all this is unfolding because of this portrait. And and just before the intuition class started, I was able to unveil this to her virtually, because she hasn't seen the original yet.
Oh, really? Wow.
And that's always fun. Even, I've begun to get used to, I'll turn you around so we can talk.
Yeah.
I've begun to get used to being comfortable with what's with someone standing in front of me, that emotional impact of, unveiling a painting, which is, there's nothing that can replace that. But at the same time, some of my clients are in Europe or, wherever. So we can still sense, just because it's a computer screen or a phone, it's just like that, there's no difference between the painting and a real horse. Of course there's a difference, but you can still tap in to the emotion and the sense of what's triggered in you. And so we had this wonderful connection, and everything she said about the painting was like, that not only did I capture her, but that the wings and the colors of the amethyst colors were, like she said, this is my her healing stone was an amethyst stone,
Okay.
and things that, you know, that happen. But it's just beautiful to be a part of the big picture. And what I love about it is that that this mare is still alive. Like this is a
Yes.
portal to her, and with Holly's heart and the healing that she's gone through, and her learning about intuition and beginning to trust herself. That she said that was all Claire did it when she was in her life as a physical horse. That she was always just right there with her, like, yes, this is it. Yes, this is it. And that she's still doing that, and that the art is a way to tap into that, and photographs can help too. But the thing that I've discovered with photographs is that they remind us of the past. So sometimes if it's a painful past, it's difficult to, you know, you go back into that moment. And so I just encourage people to start thinking about the immortal nature of beings around us and our horses. I really do. Every vision, every painting that I've done with the spirit of a horse has felt like the horse is definitely connected with their person after they've passed, and that there's no separation to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've tapped into it here, but that bigger picture, you know, and that you know, that really,
Yeah.
and you've talked about intuition and that immortal nature of beings that, yeah, what are horses teaching us now? Like, what are they showing through artwork, through one-on-one, like as a collective? What are they showing us now? What are they?
Yeah, I think that because we have this emotional kinship with them, this just age-old depth of understanding between our species, they inspire us to tap into nature, and they are a more tangible form of nature because we have this understanding of each other and this kinship that goes beyond words. And I think that what we're invited to do is experience that kind of kinship, whether it's virtual or in a pasture. There's a lot of people who don't have access to horses right now, especially. But through their own experience with I think film is becoming a really wonderful way to help people tap into that. And you know, like you said, the drawing horses or meditation or whatever we can do in our own space, even if we're isolated from connecting with the horses right now physically. But of course, being there with them physically, even that has its challenges. As an animal caretaker, you know, I can easily just go into the caretaking role and forget. I'm going to lose you here, so I'm going to go.
If we lose you, it's fine. We'll stay here, and she might go up and get her computer. Has anybody, while we're waiting here, has anybody got any questions for Kim? We're well past our hour long, but if anybody has any questions they would like to ask him, we might be able to fit one in before we go. I think we've lost her for a bit, and I thank everybody for joining us today. It has been a pleasure to be able. In fact, while we're waiting for Kim, I will show you something that maybe I was going to show you at the end here, but I will reveal it now. But these are the printed, as you can see, printed copies of Equine Leadership. Yep, we lost her. Printed copies of Equine Leadership 5. So as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to pick the rest of them up. But we finally got them. I've been waiting to do that. I've been waiting to do that in the times we're in. Haven't been able to, but we are ready to go. So I will have that up on the website soon and on the Facebook page as far as people can get copies of them and have them ready, especially folks that are in, starting to get programs up and going again. There she
Sorry.
is back. No, that's great. Good timing. I was just talking about the magazine, so perfect. So actually, we were talking about, we were talking about sort of that bigger picture, a little bit of that, and that you were talking about that emotional kinship. I love that word, that emotional kinship that we have with the
Yeah.
horses, and how that, how we tie into that. Um, how does that, if you were to call, we always finish with one call to action. So we always sort of like focus in on the horses and ourselves, and what if you had one call to action for humanity right now, what would that be?
I think what would be fun is if people would choose a virtual horse somehow, whether it's through art or photograph or a YouTube video or whatever, since we're all sort of in our virtual worlds right now,
Okay.
and form a relationship with that horse as if you were meeting them for the first time and standing in front of them, even if you've never had a equine facilitated session with a horse, just to stand in front of them in your mind's eye and begin to ask them questions about who they are and who you are, and have a dialogue with whatever form of horse you can access right now.
Absolutely, yeah. That's brilliant, and that's
Journal, and
yeah.
whatever you can glean from that, you could, it's funny, it's sometimes when people, and I myself run into this, I have had my horses that have passed, and I have their photos up on my wall, and I haven't painted them because I'm so busy painting for other people. And if I were to commit to something for myself, it would be to finally start putting chalk to paper for one of my horses that has passed,
Your own,
because
yeah.
we get busy in our lives and we don't keep up that spiritual connection. It's like I do it for other people to help them connect with their horses, but for me myself, I'm so busy doing that I forget to do it for myself. So I'll share in that commitment to recreate the virtual relationship with one of my spirit horses.
I laugh because as we're talking, the whole time we're talking here, my old horse has come through. And he keeps coming through. I'm like, what would he look like in a picture? And he just keeps coming through. As one I had for 20 years, my farm was named after him, and he's right here. He's been here the whole time. Interesting you say that, to reconnect. I'm like, okay, I understand. So
well, it's like, we have, when they're in our lives, even if we're not like sitting and meditating with them, we feed them. We have those times of the day where we feed them, and it's like they still need to be fed and we still need to be fed.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I have a question here, Kim, from Malcolm McGinnis. How did the meditation and intuition with the spirit of the horse come about?
Thank you for asking that. I was actually going to share that, so that's perfect question.
Good. Yeah.
Let me see. I wanted to show you a painting that will kind of begin to answer that. So when I was first starting my art, this painting on the wall here is called The Messenger.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a painting of this horse. At the time, I thought it was, just for a beautiful representation of this amazing being that I felt compelled to paint. I didn't really understand why. It's probably hard to see in the light here, but
No, see it. It's great.
it's a
Thank you.
horse with beautiful wings.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture of the horse, and it was like, I know him, and or the being that this horse is representing. And I really felt strongly I had to add wings, but they were not like real feathers, they were more like spirit, and it was all new to me. I was just beginning
Mhm.
that exploration. And I went to a workshop on shamanic work and your animal totem, and I was so intrigued by that. And it was, a huge group of people in a conference room, and she did a group meditation, quick sort of shamanic journey while in your chair, and just asked for whatever creature comes to you, and I'm thinking, I shouldn't pick a horse. I shouldn't pick a horse because that would just be too expected, like I was making it up, right?
Yeah.
So I kept expecting it to be something other than a horse, and what showed up was this white-winged horse. And I was like, oh, okay, well, am I making that, so then you start questioning, am I making that up? Is it really real?
Yeah.
And I later, once I began learning how to do that kind of stillness and that kind of questioning within myself, I began getting glimpses of who this horse being was. And once I got glimpses and I began to make sense of it, um, I began to trust. And when I began to trust, then I could ask more questions.
Mhm.
And in this case, it was, I call him the messenger, but he is like, not just for me. He's not, he's a guide for whoever he wants to assist or who wants to request his assistance. But in my case, my interpretation of what I saw and felt was that he was a horse being who was like a horse angel in horse angel form, and that he showed me what it was to be a horse in his body, like he invited me into his body. And
Mm.
I began to understand why, as a child, I wanted to be a horse and grew up galloping around on my hands and knees. So as I learned to trust, I began exploring different forms of meditation, and they varied from shamanic journeying to just getting quiet and trying to visualize. And I'm still learning. I'm still taking classes on intuition and
Mhm.
grounding and centering and receiving, because it's easy to there's just so many layers to that kind of learning. And but really it starts just like with learning how to draw. It starts with putting your hand on the paper. It starts with sitting in the
Yeah.
chair.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of get out of your own way.
Yeah, and when I started experiencing um, the equine facilitated work that you all have been
Mhm.
talking about, that was a huge piece for me, because
Okay.
then I began realizing that my imaginary world and my dream world and the experiences that I felt with horses on an emotional level, but didn't have uh, really, probably at that time, I'd just gotten Dharma, so I was just opening up to having a horse in my life,
Okay.
much less being around horses. When I started my career, I wasn't really even around horses for the first
Mhm.
um, 8 years or so. I was still just, living my life and painting them. So when I began tapping into that, what that feels like to stand in front of a horse and ask myself and the horse, who are you, and who am I, and what do we have to learn? And the first experience I had was just so emotional. I couldn't deny that there was a huge, vast consciousness that was just waiting to be engaged with. And when my intuitive pictures came up in that context, and the horse responded and reacted with their
Mhm.
body language or their interaction with me, then there was this feedback. Like I'd never had the
Mm,
feedback in my
yeah.
own intuitive world. You can't always tell unless somebody says, oh, that means something for me. Oh yeah, that's really true. Or you've picked up on something that, that like my amethyst painting of Claire,
Mm.
whose name is Clairvoyant, by the way. Her owner didn't tell me that.
Really? Bam.
Yeah.
Wow.
So to be with the horses and to feel that tangible and visual and emotional and kinesthetic feedback is really when you start to learn and understand that we all have this ability to tap into our intuitive messages.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Kim, I have a comment here from Katrine Pett of Cornwall, and she's so grateful for your gift of sharing a most beautiful gift of connection with our horses. Your art is beyond words for me, for it moves my heart and soul. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think we got many comments and thank yous here. Um,
Yay.
so thank you. I'd like to finish. So much in your article in our last magazine here resonated, but I reread it last night, and I love horses could help offer us a way back to nature, back to our inner nature, and back to the canvas of our spirit. I think that is. I think that sums it all up.
Yay.
It's such beautiful words. Um, Thank you. I just beyond thank you. Thank you for wrapping this whole series up. Thank
Beautiful.
you for all that you do, and thank you for connecting us with horses in a different way.
Yes.
And
Amen.
thank you connecting us to our own spirit. I think there's it's many spokes on the wheel, but you're bringing us back to our own spirit and our
Oh, well,
connection
thank
with
you.
ourselves. So I will write this all up. I will put some of the links in there. I'd love to have the link from where you're the store that you go to there. You got your no, well, yes, that
Oh,
um, your um, your
oh,
artwork,
the
the
teacher cup.
horse, yeah, the chairs and
Yeah.
the horse. Love. I'll put all that in
Oh,
there.
yay.
So if you want to send that to me, I will put that in there. But thank you so much. I'm sure we will be
Thank
in
you, Linda.
touch, and I look forward to working through the rest of the YouTube. I'm having so much fun with that. So, yep,
Yay.
thank
Thank
you.
you all for
Okay.
joining us, and I'm so glad to connect with everyone out there that was listening. It's really a joy for me to feel that audience virtually.
Yes, yes, we're connecting virtually, just like you said.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Kim. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.